Flannery O'Connor once said, "Anyone who has survived childhood has enough material to write for the rest of his life." But for most of us, understanding whether we have enough content, enough stories, enough ideas for a real solid book can be really, really difficult, especially when you haven't done it before. And that's why today I want to answer one of the most burning questions, one of the most common questions in my email, on my calls with my clients. Do I have enough material for a book? Stay tuned. Your memoir could change someone's life, but not if you never get it written. And that's why I want you to join us in the next cohort of the Memoir Method. This small, curated 9-month group program will take you from idea to published, and you're going to do it with direct access to a nonfiction and a fiction specialist. You're going to do it with an entire training vault designed to help support first-time authors in their memoirs, and you're going to do it with a community of like-minded women who are writing alongside you with the same dream of using their life story to help others. When you're ready, head over to pageandpodium.com/apply. One of the most common things that keeps people stuck, keeps people from moving forward on this book journey that I know they want to be on, is this sense that you don't know if you have enough to fill a book. Of course, this makes sense. Our brains are not particularly good at imagining large-scale projects in that way. Once we read a book, of course, we can look at the larger picture, but as we are writing it, it requires us to move from a big picture down into the weeds, back to the big picture, and so on and so forth, back and forth until that book is done. The problem is, if we aren't sure that we have enough at that large scale, it makes it nearly impossible for us to move forward at the small scale. And if we're not able to move between the book as a whole and the individual writing, it means that we very likely don't make any progress at all, but usually not the progress that we want. So I want to talk today about how you can identify what is happening in you that's keeping you from understanding whether you have enough for a book. And then I want to give you a quick and dirty set of steps that you can use to determine for yourself whether you have enough for this book project. Okay, so let's start by thinking about some of the really common ways that people will try to solve this problem of not really being sure if they have enough. Because I think if you can see yourself in any of these really common ways that people try to solve this problem, I think it's going to be really helpful to kind of unstuck, get out of that mental rut so that you really can move forward with the solution that I want to offer at the end of this video and podcast episode. Okay. So the first thing that I see, and unfortunately, this is a great impulse and it's similar-ish to what I'm going to suggest you do later. What I most often see is that people will try to determine whether they have enough for a book by jotting down an outline. Now, this sounds great on its face, and if you have been watching or listening to this channel for long, you know that actually outlining is a crucial part of any book project, and particularly memoir. However, what I see when folks jot down their outline at this stage, particularly if they don't feel certain of whether they have enough, is that that outline ends up being kind of nothing or all over the place. Either the outline has maybe 3 or 4 points, or the outline sometimes starts as 3 or 4 points and then starts to pull in all kinds of other stuff that is usually not super cohesive to what the original book idea was. What we end up with then is an outline that kind of shows us that we don't have enough, right? If we've only got those 3 or 4 bullet points, that isn't enough for a book, right? And when we start kind of padding it out, we feel that we're doing that, right? And then that kind of reinforces that we don't know what we're doing. We probably don't have enough. We're having to pull all this stuff. So this outlining thing, I want to tell you, it's a good impulse. If you have done this, there is no shame to it. But we usually need, especially as first-time writers, especially if you're doing your first narrative book like a memoir, we usually need a little more help. Usually an outline for a memoir or for a novel is not going to be something that you can just sit and kind of jot down, no matter how well you know the story, which of course very well if it's your story. What we usually need is a little bit more kind of structured support, some understanding of how narrative works. So if you have tried writing down an outline, if you kind of tried just kind of jotting your notes down, maybe in a Word doc, maybe in your journal, if that has not kind of shown you whether you have enough or not, that is not your fault. That is just simply your outlining technique. So if that's something that you have done, I want you to just let that go. We're not going to worry about that outline anymore. The second thing that I see people do really often is sort of the other side of the coin. So while some folks will be drawn to right away to jot down an outline to get something on the page, I see a lot of other folks who, when you're not sure if you have enough for a book, what you'll do is kind of carry it around in your mind. And usually this looks like shifting between angles. So, for instance, if you were writing a memoir about a really bad breakup, usually I'll see that the original angle, and usually you don't want to do this, the original angle for the book has kind of a revenge tone to it, right? Like, oh, I'm going to expose all the stuff this person did and everyone will have to see and they'll be humiliated. It's not good. I don't ever want you to write a memoir from that place. But usually we'll kind of start at that angle. And then maybe a couple days go by and we'll kind of think about it. And then it'll be like, oh, you know what? I actually think that this might be a memoir about knowing yourself. And maybe I'll kind of use my story of this breakup, kind of talk about how I came out of it. And then we'll think about it for a little while and then it'll be like, oh my gosh, you know what though? Actually, what happened in that breakup was an example of this psychological term. You can see where I'm going, that we're kind of shifting angles, shifting angles, shifting angles, and really any of those could or could not be enough to fill a book. But the problem is we have a moving target here, right? Because as you are trying to come up with these angles that you believe then you'll find one that you can flesh out, all we're really doing is keeping ourselves from that pathway forward. We're doing that octopus on roller skates, right? We're kind of trying to chase every direction when really the solution is not going to be kind of brainstorming through angles to find one that is enough material. We need to find one that is going to feel really true to you and resonate with your soul and your purpose and your message. And that leads me to the third thing that I will really often see when people don't really feel sure if they have enough material, and that is the start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. I bet there are quite a few of you who are watching or listening that have had this experience. One day you feel so confident that you've got enough, and maybe it's even a week or a month, and that is a very productive time for you. You can sit down, sometimes you can write that first chapter, sometimes your outline does get a little bit more fleshed out. But then the self-doubt comes. Unfortunately, there usually is some point, there usually are many points early in the process of writing your first book where you're really not sure what to do. So what often will happen is in this start, stop, start, stop, start, stop cycle, we will hit one of those walls where we really need help from somebody else, but we don't really realize that. And particularly if you're not really sure you have enough for a book, it often kind of doesn't feel very prudent to reach out to someone for help, right? Because are you even writing a book? Usually in the start-stop cycle, we're kind of not sure whether we are or not. So that is a really common response that I will see. And y'all know that isn't really going to get us anywhere. I know that no one is kind of doing that as a strategy, but I just do see that pop up for a lot of the folks that we work with. So if you're in that start-stop cycle, be kind to yourself and just stop. We got to make a clean start. This kind of vacillating between idea, not idea is really not going to serve you. The next thing that I will see is that folks will start to add in other ideas. So very often when we are just holding a story in our head, it will feel much smaller than it really is. That's not always the case, but very often it will feel like you could share that with somebody, in an afternoon over coffee maybe. Maybe it's not like a 15-minute story, but maybe like a 45-minute story. It feels pretty little. So one thing that I will very often see when people are kind of feeling like their story is little, also, side note from this video, but I think also important, this also happens if you think your story won't be powerful enough. I will see folks pull in other dramatic stories from their lives that actually aren't related to the thing they want to say. So in that breakup story I was giving earlier, you're writing a memoir about this breakup. Maybe your parents' divorce is relevant. It might be, but maybe not. Maybe growing up and spending a lot of time at your grandparents, maybe that's relevant. Maybe it isn't. Maybe that time you got in a car accident as a child, maybe that's relevant, but maybe it isn't. And oftentimes the impulse is, if that story has ever resonated with anyone you have told it to, you want to put it in the book. Now, this is not a sign that you need to do that. It's not a sign that your book doesn't have enough without that stuff. That is just your impulse to make sure that you are filling it out. It's your nerves being afraid that you don't have enough when I know you really want to write this book, right? So the way we don't want to do that is to kind of bring in all this stuff that's not cohesive, that's kind of irrelevant. But it's a totally understandable impulse. Again, if this is you, that is totally fine. We just need to be a little bit more thoughtful and strategic about how we're fleshing that story out rather than kind of pulling in all of these different stories that don't necessarily fit. And the last couple things that I will very often see folks do if they're not sure they have enough is that they will seek out some kind of support. You know, I love writing support. Writing support is so important, so important. But what usually will happen is if you're not sure you have enough for a book, you don't want to make a big investment, right? So usually what people will do is either they will download a free guide. We have one, the Memoir Method checklist, pageandpodium.com/checklist. But folks will download that checklist, somebody else's checklist or guide that they found on another website, or they will invest in an online class. And I'm using that terminology very specifically. These are usually like a $99 class, maybe like $149, or sometimes it'll be a class like at the community college or university in your town. But usually this is a pretty small investment. We're not making an investment that is sort of the scale of writing a book. We're making an investment to kind of dip our toe in the water. And unfortunately, those things, free guides, classes, those are not going to answer this question of if you have enough. Unfortunately, I wish that they could, because often they can be pretty valuable. But if you have this kind of burning question in yourself, I don't know if I have enough, no guide or class is going to do that. And here's the reason. The only way that you are going to move forward with confidence that you have enough is if you find a way to know you have enough in your bones. This cannot be a 1-hour consult, with me or somebody else, and I can just tell you you have enough and you will feel really good about it. That is not what will happen. I can tell you you have enough, and then usually an hour later, you're in your house, I'm not there, and it's the self-doubt, the kind of wondering, the kind of questioning that will start to set in for you. The only way you're going to know if you have enough is if you can give yourself tangible evidence that you have enough. So let's do that. So what I want to share with you is a solution that actually can be pretty quick or it can be pretty slow, and I would recommend you go somewhere in the middle. We don't want to just jot down another outline. We already talked about why that's not going to work, but this is also not an exercise that should take you weeks or months. This is the kind of thing that if you can give yourself a few afternoons, one to get started, think about it in between, the second one to kind of revise, think about it a little bit more, and the third one to really just get invested in that outline. This is going to be a really helpful tool for you. Okay, so this is a pretty simple little process that we're going to do here. All I want you to do is take out a piece of paper, not your computer. I want you to take out an actual piece of paper, and I want you to number it 1 through 5 and leave yourself some gaps between those 5 numbers. All we're going to do is get ourselves the basic skeleton of your book, and that is going to help you be able to much more strategically see if you will be able to flesh it out in a way that is not incoherent or has a lot of irrelevant details, in a way that feels really true to yourself, the message, and what you want that book to do in the world. All right, so let's talk about what you're going to put by each of those 5 numbers. The top number is going to be your topic. Now we call this the core topic in the Memoir Method because it is the topic that is at the core of your entire book. Every single part of your book points back to that topic. Now by topic, I'm talking about the specific thing in your life that you are writing about. Now earlier in this video, I was using an example of a breakup. If your book is about a breakup, a big kind of dramatic breakup that made you find yourself or whatnot, breakup is what you're going to write there. And you might write a breakup with Mark, whoever it might be. But what you are writing here is the specific thing in your life: surviving cancer, having my second daughter, adopting a child, moving across the country, starting a new job, whatever it might be. The specific thing in your life, that is your topic. Now, this is going to do a few things for you, but I think the most obvious thing it's going to do for you is keep you from that temptation of pulling in those irrelevant details, because you have this kind of guiding light. You have this core, what the book is built around. Okay, that might not be something, by the way, that you can do right now. And in the Memoir Method, we have worksheets and video trainings, and we will also very often workshop these ideas with the folks that are in the group. So you may not be able to come up with this off the top, but I want you to think about, of this period of your life you want to write about, this kind of event, what's the main thing? That's your topic. The second thing, next to number 2 on your sheet of paper, is going to be your message. Now, we call this the key message because this is the thing that is going to open up the door for your readers. Your key message is the thing that you learned through that process of going through the topic, and it's usually almost identical to the thing you want to teach your reader. Usually when we go through a really hard experience, and particularly if at the end we feel at least somewhat triumphant about it, that is the message that we want to share with people. We want to say, here is how I did it and you can do it too. It's so much easier than you think. So we want to pin down this key message. We want to make sure that we can keep coming back to it, and that as we're going through our book, every single thing we write is in some way pointing to that key message. Now, note for writing, we don't want you to beat your audience over the head with this message, right? We're going to weave it in a little more subtly than it might sound from here. But in the beginning, in these notes, which are just for your eyes, they're internal notes, you need to be so clear on your message. So that message could sound like, if you want to find love in your life, after a breakup, for example, you need to learn to trust yourself. It could be, as you are moving through a system that is full of barriers and challenges, the most important thing you can do is stay true to yourself. Or it might be something totally different. It might even be something that's not inspirational and uplifting. The most important thing is that you know what the message that you want to teach your reader is. Write it down, and you will need to workshop this, by the way. This will be something that you'll revisit a couple times, maybe more than a couple of times, and you will likely want to kind of bounce it off some people, friends, family, you maybe hire an editor, whoever it might be. But we want to make sure you've got that topic and your message. The third thing that you're going to write next to that number 3, I want you to think about the moment in your life, the event, that finally taught you that lesson. Now, this is usually going to be somewhere that's kind of near the end of your story, but it shouldn't be so recent that it was like a couple days ago. It's usually going to be that you have had time to kind of live in the shadow of that moment, but this is going to be the moment that you finally learned that key message. You had an epiphany. In fact, that's what we call it in the Memoir Method. You had a moment where you realized what you were needing to learn from this experience, so that then you could kind of practice having learned it. What was that event? What was that moment? It might be a scene, it might be a series of scenes, but we want to know kind of, when did that happen? The fourth thing, you're going to back up from that moment, and you're going to find a moment where you made the absolute wrong choice. Sometimes you tried to do the opposite of what that lesson you eventually learned is. If your lesson is to come out of a breakup and be able to find love again, you need to love yourself. Probably this is a time when you were doing things that were in opposition to loving yourself. Or it might be something that just takes you a little bit in the wrong direction. So in that example, maybe it's that you were kind of trying to love yourself, but it was maybe a little bit shallow, right? You were kind of trying to love yourself through your achievements or your appearance or whatever it might be. But this is going to be number 4, the fourth thing you write down. This is going to be a moment where you made the wrong choice, and now with the distance that you have from that time, you can now see that it was the wrong choice, that it didn't actually result in you learning the lesson you needed to learn. Although, usually it is kind of a stepping stone that we have to go through to get to that lesson. And then the fifth thing you're going to write down, the last number you've got on that page, I want you to think about the event that forced you on the path to discovering that lesson you eventually learned. Okay. Woo, it's all easier said than done, I know. But as you work for, a couple weeks, maybe longer, at filling in those 5 things, it's going to give you a lot of clarity on the most important moments in that memoir. Now, once you've got them all listed, really, you have all the hard part done. Those 3 things that we listed, 3, 4, and 5 at the end, that is going to end up being about the middle half of your book. Usually we recommend that event that forced you on the path, that comes at about 25% of the way through your book in terms of the length of pages or words. At 50%, that we call that the misguided step. That's the moment that you went in the wrong direction. And then that moment where you finally realized the lesson you needed to learn, we put that at 75%. Is there more? Of course. We've got another 25% on the front and the back of that tentative skeleton outline. And of course, in between each of those moments that you wrote down, we'll have additional chapters. We usually, just for simplicity's sake, we usually suggest that people start by thinking of that first event as chapter 5, that second event, the misguided event, as chapter 10, and that third event, that epiphany that you have, as chapter 15 in a 20-chapter book. So once you have those hot spots knocked out here, all you have to do now is look at that outline and decide, are there 4 chapters? Are there 4 stories or 4 kind of moments that can fill in between each of those major events? I bet there are. I bet there are. Now, sometimes in this process, those kind of pillars, those kind of 3 moments will shift and change a little. We'll kind of reassign them to different places, whatever that might look like. So there's flexibility here. But the point that I want to make is by getting started with a structure, not a jotted down outline and not a list of ideas, but with a structure. Once we start to get our structure in there, it's going to give you so much more clarity on what the actual book itself will look like. And remember how we started. When we can see the big picture, it makes it so much easier for us to zoom into the smaller, more detailed part and back out to the larger picture. And that's really all we're doing when we write a book. We go from the large picture into the chapter writing, all the details, and then back out as we start to revise. Now, I want to give you one quick word of caution, and that is that, remember what I said in the beginning, it is not ever going to be enough for someone to just tell you that you have enough. You have to be able to feel it in your bones. And unfortunately, a little exercise that you found on YouTube is very often going to stop short of that. What I find is that most people actually need some support to really start to get into the rhythm and the groove, we call the chapter train once you start writing, of this process. You are going to need someone that you trust, that understands what you're trying to do, that is in tune with this book that you're writing, that's checking in with you multiple times a week. So I want to make a pitch because I believe so strongly that the Memoir Method can do this for you that I really want to make sure that it's on your radar and that you're giving it some thought. This group program that we offer, it's a 9-month group program. The groups are really small. We usually only take 3 to 5 per cohort with a max of 3 cohorts at a time. So you are never in a huge Zoom room just drowning. Also, this is not an MFA. So if you're familiar with a Master of Fine Arts, that is a very in-depth process. It usually costs something in the range of $75,000 and like 7 years. We are not doing that. This is a program that we have very carefully crafted for people who are writing their first book. We want to get you through this book. You're going to come away with tons of skills. You could write another book if you wanted to, but our purpose is not to teach you all the pedantic intricacies of what to do and what to not do. We want to support you in your journey. So we build our advice on what you need in that moment. You have access to both a nonfiction expert in myself and a fiction expert who also writes a lot of memoirs in Emily Thrash, who does, by the way, have an MFA. And both of us are checking in with you regularly so that you can ask us your questions. You can get some real insider industry perspective on your project and that accountability and motivation to keep moving forward. So, if this is something you're interested in, I have good news. Right this moment, we are open for registration for our April 2025 cohort. So, you can check us out by going to pageandpodium.com/memoir-method, or if you are ready to apply, head over to pageandpodium.com/apply. I would really love to see you in this program, and I promise you, it is going to give you the clarity you need to move this book forward. Happy writing. Do you keep getting stuck in your memoir because you don't know how to make a plan? Well, so did Rita before she joined the Memoir Method.
I know.
Awesome, though. Yeah.
I mean, I love your system then, because I'm like, it really works. I guess like I can talk to it because it's never worked for me, and I've written for ever, and I'm like, I guess. And plus, I think the accountability helps. Like coming on here once a week, I'm like, it's worth the input and like, you know, giving the money over and stuff, because it just, this alone has like, I mean, it's incredible how much it's priceless.
Learn more at pageandpodium.com/memoir-method.